Okay, welcome back. I hope you enjoyed the film. I really do hope you enjoyed the film. As I've said like 10 times in the intro, I hope you enjoyed it just from the cinematography standpoint and the on location standpoint of getting to basically take a digital tour of this great, great continent in the luxury of your dorm room or your apartment room or wherever you were. So, a fantastic view of the physical world of Latin America, I should say South America. But of course, the film is also reflecting a lot of other deeper issues as well that are still quite potent in today's world. So, just for starters, to reiterate a couple things I said at the beginning, this is a film based on actual events. Supposed to be 1952 when Ernesto Guevara was 23 years old. Alberto, I think, was supposed to be about 30. Medical students in higher middle class Argentina who said, hey, we want to kind of go out and see the world around us before we get real and have real careers and have to settle down and stuff. It's a very common theme for young people. More common for, say, young men taking a road trip 50 years ago, but it's young people in general that when they reach that kind of critical phase of their life, they say, hey, I want to take a break and go see some of the world. I highly recommend it for all of you, by the way. And I highly recommend doing it on a motorcycle in South America. You could do worse things in life than retrace the route of Ernesto Che Guevara and Alberto Granado, because actually, since this film came out, it was so popular that now there are travel companies that will take you on the exact route depicted in their journals and in this film. And that's the second point. This is based on the journals of two real-life people. It is, for all practical purposes, 99.9% accurate. I don't know about every single detail. They actually left out a few details, and that was that they took a flight at one point, I believe, from somewhere in the Amazon rainforest and jumped over to Colombia for a bit. Then they jumped to Venezuela. Alberto indeed did go home after that, and Che Guevara actually indeed did go to Florida, and he did indeed pick up a bikini for his girlfriend, although I think in real life it was a scarf. He'd already been dumped in real life, so it doesn't really matter. Anyway, the stuff was real. These are real thoughts from real people at a certain point in their lifetimes, and I like the way they frame that this isn't a story about some big thing happening. This is a story of two lives running in parallel for a while and the experiences that they had. So it was real people, and indeed, the closing shots you saw there were the actor portraying Alberto Granado watching the plane fly off, right? And then it flashed back, and it was a really old man watching the plane fly off. That was the real Alberto Granado. I believe he just recently passed away at the ripe old age of 90. Che Guevara himself, Ernesto Che Guevara, didn't last quite that long. One other real point I want to add in, if you watch the credits, they showed pictures of people all across Latin America, which I thought was super nice, but those were all people in today's world, in the modern world, when they made the movie. But then in the credits, they were flashing what looked like vintage photographs. Those are actual photographs from these two dudes' journals back in 1952. So that was all real as well. It's just a really well put together film. So Alberto Granado ended up living till 90 or some phenomenal old age in Cuba. Che Guevara didn't quite last that long. Now let's get to his story then. What's this film got to do with any of that? Well, again, most of you probably recognize the iconic photo of Ernesto Che Guevara that dons t-shirts and caps and mugs and every stickers and bumper stickers and everything else you can think of. He's one of those people that, first off, born June 14th, 1928, died October 9th, 1967. So he was not a old guy when he died in his prime. Commonly referred to as Che. So Ernesto Guevara is his real name, Che, which Che is, I believe, just an Argentinian slang term for buddy. Hey, buddy. Hey, friend. What's going on, dude? Che. So Ernesto Che Guevara was an Argentinian Marxist, revolutionary, physician, and yet now you know that he was a medical trained person, an author, a guerrilla leader, a diplomat, a military theorist. He said speeches at the United Nations. He was involved in the Cuban Revolution of 1959, and he became iconic because he did so much stuff. He was a really smart guy. He was really outspoken. He lived a crazy, radical, awesome, bizarre life, and then died young. See, that's the trick. To become iconic over all history, you gotta die while you're still good looking and you're famous. And he pulled that off because he was assassinated with the help of the US CIA somewhere in Bolivia in 1967. So he's a guy who has become ubiquitous with, he's a countercultural symbol of rebellion, and he really has kind of a global insignia of clout in the world as leftist, rebel, pro-equality, egalitarian. He's the symbol of, again, this countercultural symbol of awesomeness and equality and revolutionary zeal, right? That you recognize for reasons you don't even know. Someone took a famous picture of him in his prime and it became world recognized, and it still is. So he's a symbol that's lived well beyond his years and well beyond actually anything he really did in his life. So he's an interesting 20th century character in and of himself for that. However, he's kind of beloved by some and a symbol to the youth and to rebel culture, but reviled by many more. Okay, so why is he so famous and so reviled and beloved? He, after the events depicted in this film, again, it was set in 1952, he was so miffed by the wealth disparity of South America that it did indeed affect what he did with the rest of his life, which is why this film is a pretty good one to watch. And he then became a revolutionary and said, I can't go back and just be a rich doctor in Argentina while all this disparity, while all this inequality, while all this poverty is occurring right here in our own country, our own continent of South America. So I'm going to become a revolutionary. And he made his way, after touring a little bit more, I believe, to Mexico, where he met up with these two dudes. Oh gosh, what were their names? Fidel and Raul Castro. Yeah, you know those guys. And he got into cahoots with them, and then several years later ended up on a ship called the Granma with the Castro brothers and a group of other revolutionaries to go try to liberate the right-wing dictatorship-held country of Cuba. They landed, and it was a crap fest. You can go look up this whole story on your own. I won't recite the entire thing. However, the Castros and this band of brothers survived the initial landing in which most of their company was wiped out. So did Che Guevara. And they hid up in the hills of Cuba, and they started a counter-revolutionary movement that indeed, by 1959, turned into the Cuban Revolution, and they overthrew the government, and Cuba became a communist state led by Fidel Castro, and the rest of the story, you know that. Che was an integral part of that. He was up for Argentina. He wasn't even from Cuba or Mexico, but he got swept up in this, and he was a battlefield commander and strategist, and really, him and a couple other dudes are the ones that really won the war. Yeah, the Castro brothers were kind of the head honchos in charge, but it was people like Guevara who really led the charge and won lots of the fights in the revolution itself, and he was a beloved figure. Beloved, because he lived this grandiose, larger-than-life life, and just people thought he was awesome, and he was all about equality and all the stuff that I've now talked about. But here's why he's reviled. In his true kind of revolutionary spirit, he said, well, okay, we're going to make this an equal place, this Cuban Revolution. We're now communist Cuba. And the only way to deal with the enemies is to kill them all. So he was kind of put in charge of, let's just say, military judicial law, in which he oversaw the slaughter of all of the former regime that used to run Cuba. So conservative folks revile this guy and hate his guts and see him as, a bloodletter. Pro-liberal people see him as a liberator. So he has an interesting bipolar, he causes like bipolar symbolism. You either love him and what he stands for equality, or you hate him as this bloodthirsty tyrant who got in charge and wielded tremendous power and killed all of these former military people who propped up the Cuban regime. So that's why he's beloved and hated. He was also hated at the time because, of course, this is during the Cold War, and the United States and all of its allies weren't really happy about Cuba turning communist, and they really weren't happy about this guy named Che Guevara, who pledged his life to running around and trying to start other revolutions across Latin America in order to convert those societies to communist. Once Cuba got converted to communism, the Castro brothers hung out because that's their country and that's where they stayed. Che, on the other hand, was a wild card, and he ended up spreading the revolutionary message as much as he could and fighting for revolutionary causes in Congo, over in Africa, and maybe a couple other African countries, and then ended up in Bolivia and other parts of South America trying to incite and invoke a rebellion there as well. Che really thought, as did most of the communist thinkers at the time, Marxist communist thinkers, that capitalism was long-term a bad deal for the majority of people, the workers, who were always under the thumb of the capitalist. And they, in Che's case in particular, he saw the United States as kind of a capitalist imperial overlord that had too much influence in Latin America. So it's no big surprise that the United States government was none too keen on Che Guevara and the CIA worked overtime to try to take this guy out. And indeed, he was eventually, with the aid and assistance of the U.S. CIA, tracked down while he was leading some resistance movement and uprising in Bolivia and was assassinated. 1967, that's the end of that. Okay. His revolutionary fervor and spirit and iconic image live on. And most folks don't even know what his storyline was. And that's all the storyline I'm going to give you on his actual story and his actual life. If you're intrigued or interested in this, please, by all means, go research it some more. Just go Wikipedia, if nothing else, and read more about the stuff that he was involved in. Let's get back to the film, though. What's this film got to do with any of that stuff? None of that stuff was depicted in this film. No, it was not. And that's why it's a dandy little world regions piece, because it was mostly about physical geography. But I think the film is suggesting, and perhaps quite accurately, that this particular trip by this particular guy, this particular moment in his life, is what gave him this social conscience that led to the events of which I've just kind of outlined in very bare bones detail, which made him a historical figure in his own right. Obviously, initially, this story started as a youthful, hedonistic road trip. We're just going to go party and have fun. And of course, Albert Granado is trying to have sex in every single country in Latin America, which they say is historically accurate. He was on a mission. So it started in... This is not a guy who read too many books when he was in high school and decided to become a revolutionary. They're suggesting that it was this road trip that changed him. He was training to become a doctor. Then they did this, and then he could not go back to his old life. And by all historical accounts, that's pretty spot on. That is indeed what happened to this dude and why he became so historically famous and did all these actions, which, again, are good or bad, depending on your viewpoint. It's first and foremost, I think it's an entertaining movie. It's an accurate portrayal of the formative youth of this revolutionary icon. And mostly it was these encounters with social injustice in his own backyard of South America that really transformed the way that he saw the world. And I will point specifically, and again, it's very symbolic. This happened in real life, but it's very symbolic in the film, that what was being represented when he swam across the Amazon to the leper colony. He was swimming from the healthy, rich, well-organized, well-fed side of the river, and swimming to the deprived, impoverished, and sick leper colony side of the river. And again, it's very symbolic. That was this point in his life that he was leaving behind this very easy life he could have had to swim the Amazon River, to go be with people and try to help people and fight for social justice and equality. Again, maybe it's a little too sappy, but the guy really did it in real life. And I think it was a nice, fitting, symbolic way to tie it into this film. So what we have here is a couple of young guys who end up as politically active Marxist revolutionaries in their later life, probably highly defined by this era that they did a one-year road trip across Latin America. And seeing a continent of social and economic contrast that then and now has been a defining feature of South America and Latin America as a whole. So South America still hasn't achieved the level of political unity that Che Guevara and others, even 50 or 100 years ago, were suggesting South America should have. Hell, many folks at the formation of the sovereign states of South America said, hey, we should just be one big state. It's always been an idea that there should be much more unity in Latin America, but specifically South America. And that hasn't happened yet. Although, hopefully you've learned in this class, they're closer now than they've ever been with international organizations like Mercosur, UNICER, even the TPP, these trade unions that are forming up, and there are aspirations to make UNICER and Mercosur into kind of an EU of South America. So they're closer now than they've ever been, but they're still not there yet. And while South America, virtually every country of South America is much more democratic and much more freer and fairer than it was in 1952, they still do grapple with tremendous wealth disparity. It's amazing how things change and how things don't. And that landlessness, indigenous rights issues, did you pick up that along the way? That a lot of the indigenous folks are like, yeah, people just came into the land we've had for 1,000 years and said, we don't have a piece of paper, so we're off the land. These are all very real issues then, very real issues now, and combine indigenous rights, landlessness, wealth disparity. It is the major theme of South America and Latin America as a whole, as I keep saying. And I'll end with this, and this is a quote from Gael Garcia Bernal. He was the star. He's the guy that played Che. You might recognize him. He's Mexico's most famous actor. He's Mexican. He's not Argentinian, but he's Mexico's most famous actor. This is one of his first films, first, second, or third film, I think. And he said, and this is a quote when they were making the film, we were reenacting a journey that was done 50 years ago. And what's surprising is that the social problems of Latin America are the same, which is heartbreaking in a way, but also makes you feel how important it is to tell this story. I hope you agree. Thank you, Garcia Bernal. You're super awesome. As is Walter Salas, the producer and director. As is Che Guevara for writing down this entire diary, him and Alberto, that was now made into this film that we can all share. Hope you enjoyed the movie. Hope you learned a little bit, just a little bit, about Alberto and Che Guevara. Hope you learned a little bit about South America, its physical geography, and learned just a little bit more about why this character, Che Guevara, who became such a historic icon to this day, got to be that way. Cool? Hope you enjoyed it. Party on.